Hello, everybody. Can you hear me already? Yeah, okay, good. Thank you again for having me. Thank you for organizing this meetup and my journey, everything in that way. It was really special. So I'm really glad being here first here in Groningen, my first time, so it's good being here, but also at a meetup again with so many people. I really enjoy having this in-person meetups again as a speaker, but also as an attendee. So it's really good being here. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Christoph Rumpel. I'm a web developer from Vienna, Austria. I've been working with PHP and Laravel for 10 years. I'm doing freelancing, but I also have my own video courses, my one-man business, so that's what I do. And everything what I'm sharing it on my channels, mostly on Twitter, so I'm sharing my story coding-wise, so what I've learned while coding, but also business-wise with my one-man business. So if you're interested in any of that, you can always go there and find the stuff that I do. Also, if you have any questions later, today, tomorrow, whenever, you can always reach out to me on Twitter. So my talk today is called Why Refactoring is the Best Tool to Write Better Code. And it's already quite a long title, but it also tells you quite a lot what I want to tell you today. So we want to talk about what refactoring is. What does this mean? Then we need to talk about what better code means. This will be more difficult. And then we also have to find out why do we need the first one to get to the second one. So that's my goal for this talk. And we're going to start with what is refactoring. Who of you thinks that you know what refactoring means? Oh, come on, don't be shy. Yeah, so maybe a quarter. Okay, and who of you is using refactoring regularly? More people than knowing what refactoring is. Okay, interesting, but also about a quarter of the people here. Okay, we're going to find more about that out. So when I started working coding, especially, then I heard about refactoring has to do with legacy applications. And back then, I didn't even understand what legacy application means because it's a term that you don't learn that much in English. So I had a hard time understanding what refactoring really means. So it took me, I think, 1 or 2 years to understand, okay, refactoring has to do with old applications. And we want to bring old applications, give them a new updated look and that it works better. So that's the first interaction that I had with refactoring. But also 2 days ago, I asked on Twitter, what does refactoring mean to you? And I got some nice replies, which you want to go through here by Lotje. Is this how I spell the name, pronounce the name, Lotje? I think she's from Belgium, Freek?
Yeah,
Lotje, okay. Making code more future-proof. Already a good one, so refactoring has somehow to do with the future. Then the next one, by Lars, simplification mostly remove abstraction layers of no value, remove dead code, make long functions shorter and precise, go through code and make it ready for upcoming releases. Also a nice one. Then Dominic saying refactoring is really relaxing for me. The logic already works and I just need to make it more beautiful. It's like, it's a bit like turning a sketch into a painting. And this is one which I really like because for me this sounds like if you have working code, it's not really ready. It's like a sketch, but if you do refactoring, if you work on the code a little bit more, then it gets finished. And that's also what I think about when I think about refactoring. And then Renee, changing a piece of code to be easier to work with without changing the original function, breaking tests. So this is now a little bit more technical already. So we're getting closer to what the technical meaning is. And then the last one here by Fabio, don't have the future myself to blame the current self. Which I think is also true, and I think we also all have been there, taking a look at our code, maybe next week, next month, or next year, and thinking, yeah, maybe I should have spent some more time on this part of the code. But when we look up refactoring, you will find something like refactoring is the process of modifying and restructuring code without changing its functionality. So this means we're going to change the code somehow. We're going to change the structure maybe, but the output, the result, the outcome will still remain the same. And this is very important. So everything else, so your users won't see any difference for your code. Your test should still work. Everything should behave very or identical to before, but just somehow we changed the code itself. And I got some examples for you today. So here I'm going to show you some commits. On the left we have the old code, on the right we have the new code. And I want to know from you if this is valid refactoring. So here in this example we're changing a class name and we're changing the namespace. Raise your hand if you think this is valid refactoring. Okay, most people are not sure, some of them. Yeah, so this is valid refactoring because we're just changing the name and the namespace, and the output of the code still is the same. Of course, this should be all valid classes and valid namespaces so that we don't throw any error, but the output is the same here. So check here, this is what refactoring is. What about this example here? Now we are inside a test, and on the left we're using an artisan comment with the signature of the comment, and on the right we're using the class name itself. So again, do you think this is valid refactoring? All right, a little bit more than before, so probably a third of the people think it's refactoring. And yes, that's true too, because there are two ways to call an artisan comment here in this test, and one is with the signature and the other one is through the class name itself. All right, another one. What about this one? Here we are changing the time zone of our application. Who thinks this is still valid refactoring? Okay, are you sure? Some faces, I'm not sure if they are sure. Yeah.
See, it's iffy because UTC is more globally accepted, but it depends on the database, because the database is different from PHP server.
Yeah, so it also depends a lot on how we are using, but in general, we would say that that this is not valid refactoring because there are many things that could be different if we change the time zone, especially if we have a lot of data taking this time zone and showing some specific dates to the user, stuff like that. So this is not what we call refactoring anymore because there are many things that could go not only wrong, but just differently than we expected. All right, I got one more for you. This is now inside a longer query. And we have changed on the builder where we're using on the left the upcoming scope, and on the right we're using the upcoming or live scope. So again, raise your hand. Do you think this is now valid refactoring? I hope it's good enough to read. Here's the old method we're using, and on the right we're using a new scope here. Sorry?
Different outputs shown.
Yeah, so he says different output. Yeah, could be. So
depends if you just change the name of the function or also the internals of the function.
Exactly. So just by showing you this, we can't really tell because it could be that we're just renaming the same scope here, or it could be that we're using a different scope here. So I probably should have showed you a little bit more of this commit than you probably would have known. So this is one where we can't really tell if it's refactoring or not. Okay, but I hope we still have now a better understanding in general what refactoring means. I showed you some examples. Now we want to talk about what is better code. And I can tell you already this will be a little bit more difficult to explain because, yeah, what is better code? I have a very good friend. He's called Harold, and Harold says, more code is better code. And from your reaction, I would guess that many of you wouldn't agree with Harold that more code is better code. But can we really say that he's wrong? It's difficult. It's a very personal thing saying this is good code. Maybe he gets paid by the lines of code he writes. Then more code, it definitely is better code. But is he wrong even without that? We can't really say. And the point is that it's a very personal preference. It's what better code means to me probably means something else to you. So everybody has a different opinion about what better code means. And when we hear about better code, we often hear things like following solid principles, making code more extendable, more easy to use, more secure, so whatever you define. And I have thought about this for myself for many years now, and I think I now got a really good understanding what I believe better code is. So I try to make my code easy to read, easy to understand, less code. I believe less code is always good code, and consistent. And these are things that I aim for when I try to make my code better. And I also refer to this as simple code. Not because it's simple to write, which is definitely not the case, but it's simple to understand, simple to read, but also simple to change and to maintain. And these are also two things that I really look for my code, because if I come back to my code next year, it will be way easier for me if I have followed my own principles to write better code for myself. All right, so why do we need now refactoring to write better code? Can't we just write better code? It seems this would be way easier, than we don't need this refactoring thing and we can just write all better code just now. And the thing is, without refactoring, it looks like this. We're trying to make our code work. I think this is the main goal for most of us, hopefully, try to make the code work. But without refactoring, at the same time now, we're trying to make it easy to read, easy to understand, less code, consistent. So all the things that I defined for better code, I now try to do at the same time. And this all together is a lot you have to do and has a lot of disadvantages. It will take you more time because it's more exhausting. You have the wrong focus, because what do you focus on? Making it work, making it readable, making it understandable, making it extendable, solid principles, whatever, and you will end up in a lot of rabbit holes because you don't know what you're going to focus on. And this is something that's very difficult. That's why there is refactoring. So with refactoring, this looks now a little bit differently. The beginning is very much the same. We want to make our code work. But the difference now is that this is our main priority. We want to make the code work and we're only thinking about this. And then, excuse me, when our code is working, then we're going to move on. Now make it easy to read. Let's do a refactor cycle. Easy to understand, less code, consistent, whatever you have defined. But now you have the right focus to only concentrate on this part. And you don't have to think about, does it work? Because you already checked this off. This is why refactoring makes it way easier to improve your code. And refactoring works best with tests because they are like best buddies. If you have tests in place and refactoring, they are like here in this GIF, they are best buddies forever, and you really want to have this kind of relationship inside your code. So the reason is now, with refactoring, we're going to change a lot of code. And if we're changing code, what will happen? We're going to break some code. That's just how it works. That's just how coding works. And if we have tests in place, our tests will tell us, hey, you probably broke something here. Please give this another look. If you don't have tests in place, then you will never know that you break something. And probably your users are going to tell you that something is not working anymore. And also you're going to end up with those classes where your colleagues say, don't touch this class. It works. We don't want to update it. It's good as it is. Please keep it as it is. And pretty sure we all have seen those classes, those projects where people tell you not to touch it. And that's exactly what we don't want to have. So having tests in place is here very helpful and will make your life way easier. All right, live demo. Are you ready for some live coding?
Do it.
Yeah. So I have a platform called Laravel. Who of you knows Laravel, the platform? Okay, not enough. It's laravellstreamers.com, I believe. It's an open source project which I have, where I'm going to list all the live streams, past and upcoming ones from the Laravel community. So give it a look. You will always find there's something very interesting to see. And there is one feature where we're going to send a weekly stream, a weekly tweet about how many streams we had last week. And this feature we want to work on today. All right, so I'm here inside my Laravel Streamers application. It's already quite big. I've been working on this through live streams and totally open source. So the whole project you can check out on GitHub. And here we have this test for tweet about weekly summary, which is a comment which tweets out every week how many streams we had last week. And the code is already working. So we can check this off. It's working. This feature is working. And now we want to improve the code. But still, before we do this, I want to show a little bit how this works. So I have a test here. It tweets weekly summary. And here we have a comment telling us create streams for beginning and the end of week. So we're creating 2 streams here. Then we are calling our artisan comment. And then we want to make sure that we have sent a tweet and also that a specific message was sent here with those two streams in it. By the way, I'm using here Twitter fake class, which I have created, which just gets swapped out in the service container while I'm using tests. So this means while I'm using a test, I don't really use the real Twitter client. I'm using the fake one so that I can just make sure that I don't really tweet something. And when I then call this tweet method, I can store the last message and also the count of how many tweets were sent, which I'm going to use while testing. All right, then if we run this, this should pass, and it does, it's working. All right, and now we have the best base to work on our code, try to improve it, because now it's working, and we also have a test telling us that it works. Let me also show you the comment just before we start here. So this is the comment where we're getting all the streams from last week, and then we're going to call this tweet method here where we're sending the count of the streams which we had last week. All right, that's how this is working. And when I'm starting with refactoring and trying now to make my code better, I always start with checking out file names, variable names, method names, and take a look if there's something that I can improve. And here I can already see under my comments directory, I have a tweet about live streams comment, I have a tweet about upcoming streams comment, and also the new one is called tweet weekly summary comment. So it sounds very similar, but still we don't using this about inside the name. So I think it's a good idea for consistency to also add this now here. Let's call this tweet about weekly summary. And now we can easily see if we get to this directory, we have those three comments and they belong together. And again, we're talking here about very small changes, but they will help you to help improve your application over time and provide consistency overall. And this will also help you while searching for specific files, because if they have the same name, it's way easier for you to see if there are different files, if they belong together, if they do something similar or not. Okay, so these three now look quite good. What about our test here? Let's check this one out. By the way, there's one shortcut in PhpStorm which you pretty sure know is to open up the sidebar, which is pretty nice. It just opens up the sidebar at the same location where you have been before. So now I'm in the resources folder and I get here again. But there's also another shortcut to open up the current file in the sidebar, which I'm going to do here. And it directly brings me to the current file which I'm using, which I use all the time. So this is a very cool shortcut to know. And it's called, let me check again, select open file. So if I haven't used this one, give this a try. You're going to use this all the time. Okay, so here you can see this test now is under my features folder. And this one is called tweet about. So here we were using the tweet about weekly summary name, but here at the end we are now missing the comment. And I like to have from a test the same file name as the class which I'm testing, just with the test at the end as a suffix. And we can also see we have some other comment tests here. We have also used here the same structure as well. So let's try to change this here again. And let's call this tweet about weekly summary comment test. All right, that's better. But now I've seen also that we have a directory for comments. So probably it's a good idea to bring this comment inside this directory. And you maybe think, okay, that's totally obvious. Why haven't I done this before while implementing the feature? But these are all those things that I don't think about while making the code work. I don't care where this test currently lives. I've just used the shortcut, and by default, it gets to the feature folder. And now after the code is working, I can think about where do I put this class, what is the name which I want to have, and so on. Because now I can focus only on this specific thing. So let's move this class with PhpStorm. Whoop, not rename, we want to move the class. Okay, let's try it again. No, too many shortcuts. So move the class. Freek gave me a typical Belgian beer today with 9% alcohol or something like that. And in Austria, we don't have many beers like that. So it's his fault if I'm not typing as good as normally. All right, so now we have this test inside the comments directory under my features folder. So if we go in here, we now already see we have 3 tests here, and now they have all a very similar name. And also one reason for keeping consistency for naming files, if I look now for something with weekly, we can see that I find those 2 files here. The first is the comment, the second is the test. and the name is almost identical, and this tells me already that those two files belong together, and they do. One is the test and one is the real implementation. All right, so I'm good now with file names. What about, let's go on with the test here. So what gets my attention every time is a comment like this: create streams for beginning and end of the week. And what I try to do is I try to get rid of this comment and think about, okay, what am I missing now? And it's pretty clear that without this comment, it's not so easy to understand what we're doing here. We're creating two streams, this is clear. They should be approved and finished, that's also clear. But then we are setting the scheduled start time, and here we are creating some kind of dates. And it's not clear anymore what we're really doing. So this means this comment was already good, but I try to believe that there's always mostly a better way to do this even without the comment. So the problem which we have is that we don't know what this is, what this means. And when we take a look, we're creating a date for now, we're stopping a week, and then the start of the week. So this is how we get the start of the last week. And I know it. Probably you will know it after reading it 2 or 3 times, but that's what I don't want you to do. I want, if you come to this test here, if you're a new developer, that it's very easy for you to understand what we're doing here. And this is currently not the case. And one thing that we can do in order to fix this is providing a variable name. So let me try to just grab this whole chunk. And with PhpStorm, I can introduce now a new variable, and now I'm giving this a name. So what is this we're doing here? It's creating the start of last week, like this. And let's also do this here for the second one. Introduce a new variable, that's the end of last week. Let's bring this up here. And now if we come to this test, it looks quite different. We have the arrange method where I'm going to prepare my application for the test, for what I'm testing, and I'm creating now 2 dates here. First is the start of last week, and the second is the end of last week. And I think this now is way better to read than before, because now we don't need the comment anymore, but still we really understand what's going on here. So the rest looks good. There's still one thing where I think we can improve a little bit, because here where we're creating, where we're setting the scheduled start time, I think we can also use a state here to make this a little bit better to read. Because every time when I'm writing a test, what I have inside my create method, where I'm providing some data to this factory, I'm trying to provide the data which is most important to this test. So here I'm also setting some data by setting it to improved, setting it to finished. But what is important here is setting this scheduled start time. So that's when I start with this test, this is how I set it. And when it works, then I'm going to think about how can I improve this. So let's go to my stream factory. Let's copy here this code of the finished state. And let's create a new state called scheduled for. And now here we're getting a carbon instance, which we provide from our test. And it's this one here. Let's call this date, not data. And then we don't need to set the status. We want to set the scheduled start time. And now we want to set it with the date which we provide. Like this here. And then we need to provide here the state to this method so that we have access to it. I think this should do it. And now we can use this new state called scheduled for, and we're providing the start of the last week. This means we don't need to provide this array anymore. And let's also do this here. Scheduled for the end of last week. And we also don't need this array anymore. And let's give this a try. Test is still passing. Okay, that's good. And now if we check this out again, I think this is now way more readable than before. We have the start of last week, the end of the last week, then we're creating those 2 streams here, and then we're moving on. So what about this one? Here we're calling an artisan comment with the signature. What do I want to change here? Anybody already knows what I want to change here?
Class name.
Yeah, exactly. So in Laravel, often when you use a string, there's mostly a better way to use the class string itself. So instead of using the signature of the comment, I can also use the class name. Normally, it would be pretty bad to just use the string because you have no idea of what comment this really is. with the Laravel Idea plugin in place, I still have auto-completion for all my comments with the signature. So it's still not too bad to use it. And I can also go directly from the string to the actually comment, which is good. But still, I would always prefer to use the class name, because then we don't need to use the signature, and the signature is something that could change. So if the signature is changing, then we don't have to change it here in my test as well, which makes it a little bit more easy. All right, next part, the assert part here. I think this already looks good. Again, let's run the tests. So good to have a test in place, telling us that everything is still working as expected, and that's good. All right, let's move on to the artisan comment. And I immediately see that there is a chunk of code that immediately gets my attention, which is this one here. I told you before that here we're getting the streams of last week, but just by looking at it, we have no idea what we're doing here. So we're checking something where, not null, approved, double negation somehow, specific status with stream data, then getting some dates here. So it's pretty difficult to understand what we're doing here. The most easy fix would be to just rename this to streams from last week, like this. So this now immediately gives purpose to what we're doing, because if you go to this handle method, this is the first thing you're going to read and will already be much more helpful to you what we're doing here. And you know, okay, we're getting the streams from last week. But still, since we have all this chunk of code here, people will give it a look. So that's why you have to think about, if you want to show this code, it also should be readable. If you don't want to have it, make it readable, then you can get rid of it. And we could also use a method like create streams from last week, get streams from last week, and we don't care about it at all. But I believe that we can still leave this here and have it a little bit better. All right, so where do we start? Were not null is something that I have already used in my application, and I have a scope for this called approved, which just does the same, were not null approved. All right, next thing here is where we're going to set the status. And here we also have already a scope called finished, where the status is set to finished. So these are things that I have already used inside my code, but I didn't thought about it while writing the code here, because I was only concentrated on making it work. But now this here is something new, because we haven't used this before inside this application, and I think it's a good idea to also make here a scope of this code. So let's go back to my model here where I have the scopes. Let's create a new one. Scope, let's call it from last week. We are getting here an instance of the Eloquent builder, and we're going to call this query, and we're going to return an instance of the Eloquent builder. So we have our query instance now here, and now we can bring in the code from before. By the way, quite interesting, we also had this as a question in one of our latest quizzes. You actually don't have to return the query instance here in this method, because the query instance here is passed by reference, and it would also work without returning it. But if you go to the documentation of Laravel, you will always see that also they are writing the return statement here. And since I'm using here already for all my scopes, I want to keep it consistent, and I'm also already used to just returning it. Okay, so this means instead of all this chunk, we can now write from last week. And let's run our tests. They are still working. And now take a look at how we've made, just in a few minutes, this code so much better to read. We want to get the streams from last week. This should be approved. By the way, I think this is a trick that Freek showed me some years ago. Could this be, Freek, that this was you? That instead of just starting with the approved scope, I'm using here the query method, just so that I get the approved on the next line. So these are the things now that I'm interested in, and now I have them all on a separate line, and it's a little bit easier to read. Give me the streams which are approved, finished from last week, and get this. So that's also something that I like to use. It's a little bit more code, but I prefer more code if it's better to read, and it is in this case. Okay, then we're getting our Twitter client, and then we're tweeting something out. So one thing which I also don't like here, it seems we're only using the count of the streams, so let's directly get the count here. This means now we don't need to run this count method. We also don't need the braces, and it should work like this. But whenever you do a change like this, you also should give the variable a new name, because now we have a count here. And it's good to also name the variable like that. All right, so last week we had this count. All good here. The only thing which I also like to do in all my comments is that you can return here a constant, which is called success, where there are a few constants which you can use, like success, failure, and invalid. And I like to always return here the success if everything works as expected. And now I can also give my method here a return type. All right, this looks good and still everything working. And I'm so happy that I have my test, because they will tell me every time if I break some of the code, and this happens a lot too. Okay, I think we've made this code now way better than before. But sometimes what also happens while refactoring, you notice something that you haven't dealt with like before. So what is if we don't have any streams from last week? We're going to send out now a tweet which says, last week we had 0 streams. Thanks to all the streamers and viewers, which sounds a little bit sarcastic to me. And I'm not sure if we really want to send this out. I don't want to do that. So this means we haven't handled situations where we have no streams. So it's pretty easy to deal with. You could just check here if we have the count and then do something differently. But since I'm a big fan of TDD, let's do this together now. So inside my tests here for this command, let's copy here this first half of the code, because it will be quite similar. And we're going to call this test now. It does not send weekly summary if no streams given. All right, so I could just have no streams in the database and it would work somehow, but I still prefer to have some streams in the database, but without the period of last week. So this makes it a little bit more to the real application, because we will always have streams. And if we have no streams, your test could work, but the actually feature maybe not. So this means what we need now here is the first stage should be before last week. And the second is one before with an E. And the second one should be after last week. All right, and we can get before last week just by subtracting another day here. And after last week, we can get by just adding another day here. All right, the rest is the same. This is also the same, and now we have to think about how we can test this. How we can write our assertion. And since I'm already using my Twitter fake client here, I already have here a method called assert no tweets were sent, which just checks in the back if our counter for the tweets which were sent during the test is still 0. And if we run this test now, it should fail because we haven't implemented anything yet. We expect 0 tweets, but we got 1. All right, let's go to the comment here. And here I can just check now if we don't have any streams. What do I want to do? I want to return also the self-success here. So we don't have any streams, but the comment is still a success, so it's still not a failure. And now I think this should be enough to make this test pass, and it does. All right, this new code, every time you write some new code, you have to think about, is this now good? Should we refactor this now as well? But I think this already looks good. So from my side, I'm done here. So I hope I could show you a little bit how to work on some working code to make it a little bit better. But also sometimes while refactoring, you come across some features which you haven't implemented in. And then you can do this as well, and you have tests in place, then it will always help you. All right, so for me, refactoring has nothing to do with legacy applications anymore. For me, refactoring is part of my workflow, and it's a tool which I have on my belt, and I can use it whenever I want to use it. And since I'm using a lot of TDD, test-driven development, I use refactoring a lot because it's part of the TDD lifecycle. So for every feature I build, refactoring is part of that. And I really believe that this is a very important tool that everybody should learn and use to write better code. If you go away from this talk today, I hope you're drunk and had enough pizza, but I also hope that you think about what means better code to you. Again, it could be very different to all of us, but think about what is better code, what is good code for you, and maybe you don't know it yet. That's okay too. I knew it for many years, not what I believe what better code is, but it will take time and you will get there. Also, if you work in a team or in a company, it's a good idea to write down what better code means to you so that everybody in the company works and codes towards this same goal. And I also hope you will have a lot of fun while refactoring. As I mentioned, I have some courses which I also want to mention here. Here's one which I did together with my buddy Freek about writing readable code, where we try to show you everything we have learned about writing better and readable code, and we both believe readable code is also better code. So this is a course where we show you a lot of examples in written and video forms, which we are very proud of, and it's a topic that we both are very passionate about. Also, I got a video course about Mastering PhpStorm, where I teach you how to become very efficient while using PhpStorm, using all the refactoring features, debugging features, using Xdebug, but also make PhpStorm looks beautiful. Then, yeah, it's funny because it looks pretty ugly if you open up PhpStorm for the first time and you have to put... It's also personal preference, but it looks ugly. I've also released a month ago a free video course about getting started with TDD in PHP. It's 6 videos, very short mini course about how to get started in TDD, which I also recommend if you want to start with TDD. And 2 weeks ago, I released my latest video course called Test-Driven Laravel, which is a course where I teach you how to build a full application from start to finish by using test-driven development. So for everything we are building, we are first writing a test, and on the way I'm going to show you how to write tests for all the stuff, how to use Pest, which is a testing framework by Nuno Maduro, which is very important, and yeah, how to work with Laravel, Livewire, and build a fully tested application. Okay, one more thing for all of my courses, I have for you as a little thank you for having me a little discount code for 20%, Christoph-Hardimochi-Groningen. It's only valid today and tomorrow, so if one of my courses is of interest to you, please give it a look. And with that said, thank you so much.
Are there any questions for Christoph? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Oh, would you mind repeating the question for the microphone?
Yeah.
I have one, let's say, question or remark. I'm quite new in this field, but I mean, your English is fine, but sometimes it's hard to distinguish if you say comment or command.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds the same for me. When you point to text, and I can see what you mean, but if not with text, then it can be. Most of them can understand it more or less, but it can be, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Comment or command is, of course.
Yeah, so the question was sometimes when I speak that for things like comment or command, my pronunciation is not always correct.
Well, it sounds the same then.
Yeah, it's just because it's not my main language, and that's why. Yeah, but it's good to point it out because, yeah, I didn't realize it myself, so it's also good for me to know. So.
Are there any other questions?
You seem to be very on the side of TDD. What for you was the moment when you realized, oh shit, I have to do TDD, I have to write tests? Was there like a moment?
Yeah, so the question was if there was a specific moment in my coding career where I thought, okay, now I have to write tests, now I have to use TDD. Yeah, that's a pretty tricky one to answer. So I've been coding now for 10 years, and I started testing many years ago, especially at the beginning because people told me, if you don't write tests, you're not professional or something like that. And at the beginning, this is probably the reason that you write tests, because you feel like, okay, I'm missing out, I don't do this. But the really best reason is to write tests if you understand for yourself why you're writing tests and how they are benefiting you. And for me today, I know if I have some tests, if I have, I don't know, 60% test coverage for my code, less or more, it doesn't matter. But I feel better with the work that I have done, with the work I give to others, because they have tests to tell them if we break something. I feel better that I can change, uptin, maintain my code better. And I also sleep better at night, knowing that I have better coverage for the things that I do. So this means testing, at some point I realized that it helps me, and this is the best point. And with TDD, it's a little bit different because there are not too many people out there saying you have to use TDD. There are a lot of people like Freek who write a lot of tests, but mostly afterwards. And that's fine too. But, but for me, at some point I felt that with TDD, it's not just about testing. There is a whole new concept of writing code because it's a mindset and it focuses you on a lot of things and you have a specific life cycle and it brings so much more than just more tests to you. And at some point I realized that I really enjoy this working, thinking about what I want to build first, thinking about how I can write the test, because if I don't have a good, clear picture of what I'm building, I can't write a test first. And at some point in my career, I just couldn't do it because I had no idea how I'm going to build it. I'm just going to start to code, and hopefully it will work at the end. But now I'm using the same tools for quite some years, mostly Laravel and Livewire, and I have a very good picture of how I'm going to build something. And this also helps me that I can write a good test for it, and then I can write the implementation. And for me, it feels very satisfying to use this TDD cycle.
Thanks.
I'm not sure I understood why you added in your function the return success, because I believe you changed the return type of your function, which might assume that you're changing also the functionality. So I missed this part. Why did you add it?
Yeah. So the question was, while we're using the command here, I added the return type success, which is an integer, and why I've been doing this, and if I wouldn't change the output while doing this. Technically, you're correct. This is changing the method. I know that I'm not going to use it somewhere, so I know it's not going to change anything in my code. It's mostly because of a personal preference. I don't know, have you ever used it, the return type success, for a specific, where you have checked it? I'm not sure if I've ever checked it myself. So it's like more personal preference to me. I'm not sure if there are any other reasons where you could use this, but...
When you test it, maybe?
Sorry?
When you test it to see what it returns, the assertion.
I think the assertion which you have, especially on the facade for comments, it still works even without those. So I don't think this would change, but I probably have to look it up. I can't really tell, but yeah, good point. I probably should have mentioned that as well, that there's no specific reason for that. I think here was another one, yeah?
So I really like the way you made your queries more readable by using scopes, but I felt like when you do it a lot, the models get very bloated. How do you prevent from getting your models like huge?
Yeah, so the question was that he liked the scopes which I was using, but with every scope you create a new method inside your model, and then you end up with a lot of code inside your model. And what do I do that I don't get too many bloated models? So that's always the issue with abstraction. You have to put the code somewhere. You're not going to get rid of it. You're now using a method or a scope, but the code has to be somewhere. For me, mostly I don't mind that there is now a new place where it is. May it be the model, may it be somewhere else. You can also use not the scopes inside your model, but also use classes. So I think if my model gets too big, I would use classes instead of the scopes inside my model. But it's also a personal preference. As long as I only have like 7, 8, or 9 scopes in my models, I don't mind. So I always work from where I think about where's the place where I want the code to be and where does it distract me. In the comment, I want to be sure that here it shouldn't be, because if I want to get to my comment or command, it's very important for me to easily see what's going on there. Mostly I don't go to my model and see, oh, how does my model work? And then I go through all those methods. Mostly I then get directly there from using a scope somewhere. But yeah, as you mentioned, you also have to think about if you're using scopes a lot, then you probably need to have a different solution to where to put them. Yeah?
Do you think it's a good idea to sometimes wait a little time before refactoring your code so you can get your mind off like the goal making the code work and then just being 100% focused on refactoring the code?
Yeah, it's a very good question. If I sometimes think it's better to wait a little bit more time before directly refactoring code, because you then have more focus on refactoring and you're not directly coming from the implementing the code. I believe this would help, but the big issue is if you go away from your code, do you really come back to refactoring? And many times, if you don't do it immediately or really spend dedicated time on doing this, then you won't do it. That's also why testing afterwards mostly doesn't work for me, because now that everything is finished, it seems it's working. Now writing test feels a little bit cumbersome to me, so that's why I like to do it before. But I think, yeah, at least if you have 10 minutes and can do a break and then go back refactoring, this would indeed help a lot.
Then maybe one last question before we wrap up.
One last one? Yeah.
Let's say you're working on a feature and you find some code you want to refactor that's not hasn't anything to do with what you're working on. How would you go about refactoring that code? Would you put it in the same commit or in the same merge request?
Yeah, so the question is, if I'm refactoring or working on some specific code and I see some other code which needs refactoring, do I do it immediately or how do I approach this? So I would write a to-do for myself. I would not do it right away, because this is exactly wrong focus, rabbit holes. You're doing multiple stuff at the same time. And it's just how our brains work. If we see this, we really want to tackle this right away because this needs to be refactored now. I can't wait. But yeah, if you can, you shouldn't do it. And mostly for myself, I would write myself a to-do, force myself not to touch it now, come back later, and then I have only the focus on this to-do and try to refactor this part and keep working first on the other stuff I'm currently working. Because I'm getting super easy distracted. Everything I see here and there, my mind wants, oh, yeah, I go here and this. And I really have to force myself to do only one thing at a time, because this helps me personally a lot. And of course, it's different from everybody to everybody, but for me, I would do it like this.
Thank you.
Thank you.